Hi, Tom Lynch here for In Focus Fridays. Today, I'm incredibly lucky to be talking to Dr. Sue Biggins. Sue leads the Fred Hutch's Basic Science Division, and she studies how special cellular machines known as kinetochores allow cells to separate and distribute their chromosomes accurately. As you can imagine, one of the most fundamental processes in human biology. She's an elected member or fellow of several scientific science academies, including the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Sciences. Sue, you have been a fierce advocate for open science. We're in the time now of COVID, and we're seeing I think a real sea change in the way people are looking at the way scientific information is disseminated. Tell me a little about what you're seeing and thinking about this process.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think it's actually been phenomenal to see how progress on COVID research itself has been communicated so rapidly. If scientists were only using traditional publishing mechanisms, such as journals, we would only really be starting to see published information about COVID now. And the scientists have been great about putting their work up on preprint servers. I looked this morning, and medRxiv has 6,500 preprints on COVID, and bioRxiv had around 1,700. So I didn't figure out how many of these are actually published in peer-reviewed journals now, but I think this is truly a phenomenal dissemination of information that's helping to push science forward.
So Sue, as we've seen in the first initial thought about things like Twitter and Facebook is it could democratize journalism, and it turns out that it has done that to a certain extent, but it's also led to a lot of misinformation and disinformation that's out there. How do we do the same thing and prevent, I hate to use the word fake news, but prevent false information that's maliciously being placed into scientific journals from making it there? And how do we police that?
That's a good question. Yes, I think one of the famous things you're referring to is the hydroxychloroquine retractions that the Lancet and New England Journal had to retract. So that was obviously bad actors. I would argue, the bulk of scientists are not behaving that way. And even peer-reviewed publications, which we try to think of as a process that has no flaws, certainly mistakes get through as well. So I think that you're right. There's more complications with publishing or having preprints that aren't peer-reviewed out, but even peer review is not flawless. So I think at the end of the day, one thing that was clear is that was discovered very quickly. This wasn't 10 years later that we saw the mistakes. And so in some ways, the amount of attention that the preprints are getting puts them under enough scrutiny that maybe they get more review than they would if it was just their traditional peer review like we saw in that case. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does make sense. I've always been someone who's been very struck by the variability of quality of peer review. I think that there are some journals, and the very best journals really, I think, do this very well. The editor and the associate editors spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about the science that's in the paper, and the best reviewers really make the science better. I mean, there's nothing like having a paper come back with reviews that open your mind to something you hadn't necessarily thought of before. On the other hand, a lot of review can be cursory, simple, and not detailed enough. How do we make the peer review process better, and how do we think about that?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'd say the trend now that people are working towards is even post-publication peer review. So you put your preprint up and you sort of let lots of experts in the field comment on it rather than boil it down to these 2 or 3 people that some editor selects. And scientists will certainly have differing opinions on the quality of peer review. So it's a back and forth process. In general, it does help. I do think one thing that COVID is helping with a lot is the editors are finally realizing sometimes that reviewers ask many things that aren't always central to the point of the manuscript. And COVID, all the problems we're facing with getting experiments done, a lot of editors have changed their demands on the review process, and they're really focusing on the key things that the reviewers bring up. I think reviewers were all overwhelmed is the other problem. There's more and more publications. These editors want all of the scientists doing all the work. Scientists are not paid to review papers, which is another interesting thing. The journals make tons of money, and the editors are not, the non-scientific editors, the journal editors, who that's their pure job, of course, get paid to do that. But the rest of us, it's science really relying on the goodwill of each other, and I think that has generally worked and does work well, because we all care about science and pushing it forward and want the truth to be disseminated.
And Sue, I know you
question. Yeah.
I know you thought a lot about the profit motive for certain journals. I mean, certain journals are run by for-profit companies. Other journals are run by societies. Both the society journals and the for-profit journals have a margin that they definitely make in that setting. Have you noticed any differences between the quality of science or quality review of the for-profit versus the not-for-profit, or do you think it really is similar between the two?
Oh, I think I would say it's similar. I mean, I think all these journals, these ones that we put all this focus on, you know, we call them the fashion magazines, these ones that everyone thinks they have to publish in to get a faculty position or to get their tenure. I mean, all these journals, it's all historical. In the day when, you know, before the internet, when we had to publish things in print, these journals sort of became coveted journals that if you published in there, by definition, it meant your research was better. And that's, I'd say that's all gone away now in a lot of ways. People still try to get their papers in there, but it doesn't take away from some of the quality work that's in other journals. I don't know if I would boil it down to just for-profit or not-for-profit. I think we've driven the system in large part by demanding that things that we might place more impact on ourselves, sending them to certain journals.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't tell you how many promotion committees I've been on and recruitment committees where CSN does not mean Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
Right.
Rather self-tied to nature and how many papers are in CSN. If they're not CSN, forget about it. So the next question I would ask you is, tell me, what do you think about direct publishing to Facebook and to social media? We have seen in a time of pandemic how critical it is to get information out quickly. And Trevor at our own institution has done a lot of work, and Steve Pergam of using Facebook, using Twitter as a forum to get data out quickly. And what do you think about that as a trend? Could you imagine putting your data on the Kineticore out to Twitter before it goes to other areas?
Yeah, I think Trevor is a great example. He has over 250,000 followers on Twitter. I mean, you can publish whatever you want in Nature. I don't think that many people are ever going to read it. So it's a game changer for getting information out there. And I think we're able to distribute our findings much more broadly through social media now. It's really where people are going. I also saw a recent finding that said that scientists who put their preprints up on Twitter, so the preprint would be posted on a preprint server like medRxiv or bioRxiv, but if you go to Twitter and then push it out and tell people it's up there, it said that scientists who treated their papers actually did end up with more citations later. So that's an interesting finding recently. And so the other thing is, I think it's a lot faster for scientists. I use Twitter now. I follow people in my field, and so I know that they're going to post their preprints up there. It's even faster to see it on Twitter than to sort through the table of contents of all these journals and things. So I think social media is a great way to go. And I would also argue that you get a lot more feedback. I mean, I sit down sometimes and read all the comments, for instance, what Trevor posted, and I love seeing the questions he gets. There's much more discourse about a finding on Twitter than you're going to get in these static journals where you publish it and you never know what anyone thinks unless they actually email you or talk to you at a meeting. So there's a nice trend. bioRxiv has a place where you can put comments, and I think people are still reticent to write much about it, but the social media crowd seems to be pretty vocal about their opinions. So I think you get a good read on how people are seeing your science.
Which is terrific. And Sue, thank you for bringing this to our attention and for leading a very thoughtful dialogue on how the Hutch should approach open science, because I think it's something with our faculty that we're going to need to be talking a lot about and thinking about how we're going to address this in the next coming years. And thank you for all you do for the Hutch and for the Basic Science Division. Very much appreciated. I'm Tom Lynch, and that's In Focus Fridays. Have a great weekend.